Dain, what is that strand of blonde hair to you? Someone you must kill? Or the object of your penitence?
To understand how a friendship spanning years could dissipate into sheer disgust and loathing is a feat in and of itself, and today I want to dive into the fascinating question that has plagued the Archon quests. What happened to Dainsleif and the Sibling, and why did they fall apart? I'll be expanding on this question with established character bits and dialogue from the Archon quests and other supplementary material, but I'll also be including my own theories and speculations, so be warned that nothing in this video is indicative of the final product. And I will be using Lumine as my Sibling for ease, because the supplementary video materials like the Teyvat trailer and the We Will Be Reunited story teaser respect Lumine as the Sibling. Just makes my life easier, you know? Anyway, let's begin. Dainsleif and Lumine began their journey a good few centuries ago, roughly a few years after the Cataclysm, where the damages of the Curse of Immortality and the monstrification of the Khaenri'ahns are at its peak. Prior to the Cataclysm, Lumine was known as a princess of Khaenri'ah and a mysterious power that the Khaenri'ahns regard as a beautiful enigma. Dainsleif, on the other hand, was a Twilight Sword, a royal guard of the Eclipse dynasty and presumably King Ermin and his family. It's unknown whether Lumine and Dainsleif were already close prior to the Cataclysm, but I can imagine that the princess and a royal guard would have an amicable but strict relationship. And perhaps it is because of their connection as individuals that they would gradually become good friends and longtime travel partners. So let's discuss their journey. We know that Lumine and Dainsleif arrived at Old Mondstadt prior to Dvalin's fall to the Abyss corruption, which was a good couple centuries ago. Such was the case in 3.5, where Aether gains Lumine's memories regarding her and Dain's journey through Sumeru. Paimon questions that those memories should have been centuries old. The journey began after the Cataclysm and after the separation of the twins. If Aether's current state is indicative of anything, it's logical to say that Lumine also befell the same punishment because we saw both of them trapped in the same method by the Sustainer of Heavenly Principles. Lumine says that she's been through Teyvat once already, and we see her restored to her original power because her sword is the same as the one prior to the Sustainer's trapping. This, along with her newfound abyssal powers. So Lumine and Dainsleif began their journey through the Seven Nations. How they met up after the Cataclysm isn't known to us in the current lore, but that could easily just be chance. Dainsleif walking around with the Curse of Immortality and Lumine just waking up from her slumber. I imagine the nature of their relationship wasn't exactly an equal power dynamic, regardless of how Lumine sees it. As two important figures of Khaenri'ah, aka the Princess and the Twilight Sword, it's possible that Dainsleif saw Lumine's protection as a continuation of his vow and obligation, and I surmise the relationship started as a retinue and his superior. But over time, we are shown in the Archon quest of 1.3 and the Teyvat trailer that their companionship slowly developed into something much more sentimental. Dainsleif and Lumine formed a genuine bond where he would accompany her anywhere and even pick up on her little antics and thoughts. We know this because in 1.3, he reminisces heavily about their journey to Old Mondstadt and Wolvendom, stating that he knows the stories behind those deities because Lumine used to be interested in them when they were journeying. Furthermore, he compares Aether to Lumine based on their opinions about the gods. As for their journey, it's not impossible that she also sought out the 7 statues, but I don't think she would actively search for the Archons. Unlike Aether, who didn't have any idea about Teyvat, Lumine would know very well who the Archons are and what the gods are able to do. Dainsleif in the character Miscellany knows who Venti and Zhongli are, so I think her journey would be to understand why Celestia did what they did to Khaenri'ah. The truth of her world would be in a different context than just discovering a new world, unlike Aether's of course. So it's actually really important when doing this analysis to consider how different Aether's perspective on Teyvat is versus Lumine's perspective when she started traveling. Both Lumine and Aether technically started their journey after the Cataclysm, but Lumine would have had a deeper connection with the people of Khaenri'ah compared to Aether. And this is important because remember when Aether says that it's not really a good idea for her to just sacrifice everything for a 1% chance of success? The thing is, Aether doesn't really have any connection with Khaenri'ah itself. Unlike Lumine, who actually stayed in Khaenri'ah, it's easier for him to say that what the Abyss is doing is a bad idea because he doesn't have any sentimental reason to actually see from Lumine's perspective. But going back to Dainsleif and Lumine, we know that they both journeyed through Teyvat together to find their fates, but they didn't end at the same time. According to Dainsleif, he still has business to do before he can quote-unquote go home and rest. This is where we reach the fascinating duality between Dainsleif and Lumine's ideologies. There's actually a few missing parts to the story of why Lumine hates Dainsleif, parts that I'm sure will get focused on in the future, but nevertheless should be delineated in the present. The first is Dain's passivity. Dainsleif in 1.4 openly disagrees with the idea of fighting gods, regardless of how much one hates or despises them. He says that fighting against the gods is a fruitless endeavor, and he even shares a strange passivity when it comes to the Cataclysm. He's not actively looking for revenge against the Archons who were summoned. This is in direct contrast to Lumine's stance of toppling the Divine Thrones and serving the Abyss. This, honestly, could just very well be the main basis of their falling out. DAIN's indifference could have been seen by Lumine as an injustice to his role as a Twilight Sword, who was at the forefront of the entire Cataclysm, yet could only muster silence when asked to do something about it in the future. On the other hand, Lumine's anger is seen by Dainsleif as a form of pride and irrational behavior, because of the natural imbalance between the gods and humanity. Maybe Dainsleif also sees everything that Lumine's doing as a form of arrogation, the same kind of arrogation that got Conria killed in the first place. The second is between their ideologies of the monsterification of the Conrians. Lumine says that Dainsleif stood by as he saw the people of Conria turn into the monsters of the Abyss, which actually has some inconsistencies with what we know from Caribert, because Dainsleif's quote-unquote inactivity cannot and should not rationally be the only reason Lumine hates him. Here's why. We know that the Curse of Immortality, unlike how it was framed in 1.4, isn't a punishment just for Dainsleif, but also for the pure-blooded Conrians, at least from what we know. Clothyr Alberic, for example, is a high-ranking citizen in Conrian society, and he received the same fate. And let's just put a footnote on the fact that his design and zealotry being very similar to the Abyss Lecter isn't a coincidence. Not to mention, the monsterification of the Hilichurls isn't Abyss-based, but Celestia-based. It's possible that the Abyss Order willingly let themselves become the monsters of the Abyss by succumbing themselves to the Abyss will, which means that the Celestia-based punishment of monsterification, aka the Hilichurls, doesn't extend to the Abyss Order. If anything, the Abyss Lectors and Herald regard turning into the creatures of the Abyss as the best thing that could have ever happened to them after the Cataclysm. We can hypothesize this because in 3.5, we saw that Clothyr regarded the Herald as a perfect being, and we can theorize that the Abyss Lectors and Heralds are turned Abyss-based instead of Celestia-based because of the Fate Herald, who was guarding the crystal. So to blame Dainsleif for watching as the Conrians turn into the monsters of the Abyss when she directly oversees the people of Conria who constantly praise the Abyss as their salvation doesn't actually line up. It would be quite hypocritical of her to condemn Dainsleif for that reason, a captain of the Royal Guard who was actively serving the people, because we know that Dainsleif was still barking orders in the front lines during the Cataclysm itself. He was still giving final orders as a Twilight Sword to Halfdan on the day of the disaster before Dain returned to the palace as a Royal Guard. His last orders were to inform all Black Serpent Knights to protect the people of Conria at all costs. So what's happening here? Well, my interpretation is that Lumine's statement here isn't meant to be a blanket statement, and when she says turn into the monsters of the Abyss, she means the shadowy husks and the Hilichurls, but not the Abyss Heralds and Lectors. She could also be blaming Dainsleif's current passive stance towards the gods as a form of betraying the people he was supposed to protect. Or, on a much deeper scale, what if Dainsleif and Lumine were there to witness the Abyss Order turn from regular people into the monsters, but Dainsleif allowed the change? This is very, very unlikely though, since Dain is currently on the mission to stop the Heralds and Lectors, and again, Lumine is actively working for the Order. So all in all, I really think there's just missing pieces here and there that we need to wait for in the future updates. Turning into the monsters of the Abyss has more implications than we like to believe, because on one hand, we have creatures that may or may not have been turned against their will, like the shadowy husks and the Hilichurls, and then we have the Abyss Lectors, mages, and heralds who have a higher level of intelligence and consciousness and are constantly praising the Abyss. And speaking of the abyssal entity, third is their distaste towards it. I'm not just talking about the Order, I'm talking about the entity itself. The mysterious emptiness of the void that called for fellow sinners. The beautiful enigma that corrupts but comforts nevertheless. The Abyss is referred to by Dain as chaos and destruction. It is a morass of inconceivable madness that encroaches upon this world's very foundations. On the other hand, it's possible that Lumine's idea of the Abyss started very similarly to Dainsleif, but that ideology could have changed by witnessing Caribert and seeing how Clothyr regarded the Abyss. It's possible that the Abyss Order and the Sibling see the Abyss as the final form of salvation that could potentially save them from the wrath of the gods. The Loom of Fate could have easily been their only form of redemption. Dainsleif's apprehension towards the Abyss Order itself as being quote-unquote victims of the Abyss's influence should also be telling of the dichotomy between their ideologies. And what doesn't help is that Lumine never told Dainsleif about the origins of the Loom of Fate, which is actually pretty fascinating if you think about it. But that's a theory for another day. Fourth is the restoration of the Homeland. This one is the biggest disparity when it comes to Lumine and Dainsleif, and it's their opinions on restoring the Homeland. When we think about the destruction of Khaenri'ah, we should break it down to three concrete concepts: the monsterification, which leads to cleansing, the curse of immortality, which leads to removal, and the physical destruction of Khaenri'ah itself, which leads to retribution against the gods. The Abyss Order and Lumine aim to go through all of this, with their primary goal being the restoration of the Homeland. In the Mondstadt Archon quest, the Abyss Mage states that the Homeland will inevitably return, and in the Chasm Archon quest, Lumine says that she lost sight of the true goal, which is the revival of the Homeland. We know that they tried to revive the fate of the people through the Loom, and then inevitably through the cleansing ritual of 2.6. They aim to cleanse the shadowy husks and the hilly trails of their monsterification, as well as somehow, some way, transcend the fate that was given to them by becoming the quote-unquote perfect creatures of the Abyss. The curse of immortality was also somehow broken by Clother, and the Abyss Order is actively targeting celestial and elemental creatures like Asael and Dvalin. On the other hand, Dainsleif's ideology toward his fate is almost like a forced resignation. He's accepted that the curse of immortality can't be cleansed because it's already such an integral part of his, and presumably the other Khaenri'ahns, way of living. Dainsleif also thinks that what the Abyss Order is doing is peak foolishness, and that there is no redemption, and that it would only bring prolonged suffering. And this ideology about going back to Khaenri'ah reminds me of the Intivat. It would only last 2 weeks before wilting. But if you were to pluck one and take it out of Khaenri'ah, the petals would stop growing and turn hard. But when it finally returned to its home soil, would the petals grow soft once more, and finally turn to dust? This reminds me of the idea that if a Khaenri'ahn ever cleanses the curse of immortality, or even returns to the Homeland, what if the years that they would have had lived without the curse of immortality finally catch up to them? In the end, should the Intivat return to the Homeland, or should the cursed people of Khaenri'ah return to their homeland to its former glory, what awaits them could just be a decisive end. And this is where we return to the opening line of this video to truly understand Dainsleif's current stance on their broken companionship. What is that strand of blonde hair to you? Someone you must kill, or the object of your penitence? Dain lives in this mysterious limbo of having to fight the princess of the Abyss Order who will eventually purge the entire world into darkness and challenge the heavens, or saving them from the mysterious fate that befell upon her. We see in the Archon quests that Dainsleif does still hold sentiments towards what happened in the past, and clearly regards Lumine as a close companion, and his quote in the Devat trailer gives us Dain's final thoughts. He tells Aether to fight him, to prove that he is worthier than Dain to save her. From what? Well, we can guess several things. One is the mysterious fate that befell Lumine during her journey that Nahida couldn't read in the Irminsul. What actually brought Lumine to not only become the Princess of the Abyss, but also be encoded into the Irminsul is currently unknown. Nahida says that Lumine's fate was deliberately obfuscated and is being done so up to this day. This could either be the Abyss or Celestia, but either way, it's keeping a chokehold on Lumine's story. Anyway, my name is Aster and thank you for chilling with me. A simpler, easier video to get into the gritty of things, because I just took a really long break. I just wanted to talk about Dainsleif and Lumine's falling out because it's one of the more prevalent story beats in the grander story of Khaenri'ah. But nevertheless, thank you for chilling with me.